Chapter 169 of Shrimadbhagavatam, Balarama kills Dhenuka. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Krishna was now 6 years old, and so were his companions. They were now considered old enough to graze cows. Sanctifying every spot he touched with his lotus feet, Krishna spent his time grazing cows in Vrindavana. He became proficient in playing on the flute, and he would gather his friends and the cows around him after they had been fed with the music of his flute. One day, as usual, Krishna and Balarama entered the beautiful forest with their retinue. There were flowers everywhere, deer were running here and there, and the music made by the birds and the murmuring of the bees was soothing. The waters of the river were flowing placidly, and the tranquility that was there was like that in the minds of great men. Krishna called Balarama and said, "Look at the forest, my dear brother. Look at the trees laden with flowers. The boughs are so heavy with the flowers they are bearing. They are almost touching the ground. It seems to me like they are falling at your feet and asking you to rid them of some sin which they have committed in some previous birth of theirs, which has made them to be born as trees. The bees are singing your praises, since they know you are the Lord who has deigned to be born into this world of sin to rid her of her pain." The rishis in the forest are not seen, but they are concealed somewhere in these trees and birds and bees. Look at that peacock and his dance of joy. What a wonderful tail he has. Those deer, running as a herd, look like a group of maidens with scared eyes, and the koils are making music in praise of you. Fortunate indeed is this Vrindavan and these lovely spots, which have been sanctified by the fact that you have trod on them. Balarama accepted all this tribute with a smile. It was very rare for Krishna to get so emotional and sentimental. They went along with the other boys to graze the cows in the forest. Krishna would look often at his brother and smile. Krishna was in a very happy mood. He danced with the peacocks, ran with the deer, and sang with the bees in the same pitch. The cows had wandered far, and with a voice like a rumbling cloud, he called them all by their names and called them back into the fold. They ran hither and thither and had a good time as was usual. Balarama was tired out. Krishna made him lie down on his lap and massaged his tired feet. Sridhama, Subhala, and Stoka, Krishna, were three of the very dear friends of Krishna. They came near Krishna and said, "Look, Krishna, there is a beautiful palm grove very near. There are ripe fruits there. Some have fallen on the ground and some are still clinging to the trees. They are very tasty, but we cannot get them because a wicked asura by name Dhenuka guards the grove and lives there. You and Balarama are powerful enough to kill him, since we know how strong you are. But we have to warn you, Dhenuka is not alone there. He has quite a few relations, kinsmen of his, who are just as terrible as he is. He eats human flesh, and so no one dares to enter the grove. But the smell of the delicious fruits is wafted to us by the passing breeze, and it is so tempting. We are longing to taste the fruits, and only the two of you are able to help us get what we want. Will you get the fruits for us?" Balarama and Krishna laughed at the youngsters who had such a simple desire to eat the dates from the palm tree. Therefore, they set out in the direction of the grove, guided by the host of happy youngsters. As soon as they entered the grove of palms, Balarama went to work. With his powerful and mighty arms, he shook the trees one by one, and soon the ground was carpeted by the fruit so much desired by their friends. The children hurriedly picked up the fruits. Hearing the noise made by Balarama, Dhenukasura, who was in the form of a mule, rushed to the spot. The earth trembled at his strides. Dhenuka rushed towards Balarama and with a fearful cry, he kicked Rama on the chest and started running around. Again he approached Rama. Again and again he raised his two hind legs to kick Rama and kill him. Balarama caught the two hind legs of the Rakshasa, the legs which were raised aloft. He then whirled him around and round above his head and threw him on the trees. The Asura was dead, and with his fall the trees fell too. One tree fell, and this felled its neighbor and that. The next, and all the trees rocked to and fro like they were shaken by a strong wind. Adishesha pervades this universe. Just as a piece of cloth is woven with a woof and warp, even so the universe is knit into the Lord Adishesha, who is only another aspect of Lord Narayana. Can one then be surprised at this feat of Balarama? The kinsmen of Dhenuka, seeing their master killed by the young boy, rushed towards Rama and Krishna with the intention of avenging the death of Dhenuka. Rama and Krishna stood where they were, and as each Asura came near, they grabbed him by his legs and they whirled each one of them and threw him on the trees. Soon the trees, instead of bearing their natural fruit, were seen bearing the dead forms of the Asuras on their crests. The celestials were pleased with this action of the brothers. Late in the evening, the children with Rama and Krishna came back to Vrindavana, and the mothers rushed to see Krishna, beautiful Krishna, with his body and his hair red with the dust of the roads, and with his peacock feather fluttering from his head, with his neck adorned with the Vanamala, the garland woven out of all the wild flowers in the forest, and with the eternal smile on his lips. Krishna was a beautiful vision for which the Gopas and the Gopis would wait every evening. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishna Arpanamast. Chapter 170 of Shrimadbhagavatam, The Poisoned Lake. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. One day, Krishna went towards the river Yamuna with his friends to graze the cows like every day. Only this day he went alone. Balarama did not go with him. They were all sitting in their favorite spot, talking and laughing and playing. The heat was intense that day, and the cows had wandered on their own with some of the boys towards the Yamuna. Since they were very thirsty, the boys did not think of the spot where they were drinking from. Close by the bank of the river Yamuna, there was a lake, Madhu as it was called. This lake was inhabited by a dread snake by name Kaliya, and he had poisoned the waters of the Madhu lake. No one who drank water from the Kaliya Madhu could live after. So virulent was the poison. The boys of Vrindavan, in their eagerness to quench their thirst, did not remember the warnings about the danger lurking in the waters, and drank freely of the water, as also the thirsty cows. At once they fell down in a dead faint. The virulence of the poison was so much that the birds which flew across the Madhu would fall down and die. The fumes were so far-reaching. After a while, Krishna noticed that some of his companions who had gone for a drink of water had not come, and he saw that the cows were also missing. He got up, and with him the rest of the boys. They followed the footsteps which marked the progress of the others, and found that they went towards Yamuna. This was no surprise, since they went to drink water. But the path had deviated a bit, and after a few moments of searching, Krishna saw all of them senseless in a death-like swoon. His dear cows were also lying on the ground as though they were dead. Krishna's anger knew no bounds. He looked at the Madhu. The blue waters of the Yamuna, which had flown into the Madhu, had become black with the poison which had been constantly emitted by Kaliya over the span of several years. The waters were simmering and frothing. So hot was the water, and they all stood around gazing at the painful sight. There rose a cry of lament from the other boys. Oh misery, our friends and playmates are dead and our cows are dead. Without thinking, they have all drunk water out of this Kaliya Madhu. How can we go home without them? How can we live without them? What are we to do? They wrung their hands in sorrow and despair. Tears flowed from the childish eyes. Krishna stood for a while looking around. The bank of the Madhu had a few trees, but all of them were dead since the poisonous air had killed all the roots and the leaves had dried long ago. It was indeed sad to see the immense trees all standing stark without leaves on their branches, like men who were once powerful but who had now lost all their powers and strength. Krishna saw a Kadamba tree which was very tall, and it was the sole tree which did not have its limbs scorched by the poison. There was a story prevalent that Garuda, which he bought when he brought the golden vessel filled with nectar to the earth to please his cousins and to release his mother from bondage, rested here for a while on that tree, and that was why Kaliya's poison could not quite kill the tree. Anyway, the tree seemed steady enough to Krishna, and he promptly began to climb the tree. The boys were looking on with puzzled eyes. They did not know what Krishna was planning to do. He just held out his hand to them as if to say, "Stay a while and be not afraid. I will tackle this problem all by myself. You just stand and watch." Even as they were looking, Krishna looked once at them and then reached the top of the tree. A strange sight met their eyes. Whenever his tiny feet touched the tree, green leaves sprouted at the spot, and soon the tree was a glorious sight with green leaves and sweet-smelling flowers. As their amazement grew, their eyes opened wider, and Krishna suddenly jumped from the scaffolding he had made for himself. By reaching the top of Kadamba tree, he dived into the Madhu. The children who were watching were horrified. They knew that Krishna would die in a matter of minutes. Some of them rushed to the house of Nanda Gopala and told him what had happened. Yashoda rushed out of the inner apartments, and she heard them saying, "The cows and some of the boys have drunk water out of Kaliya Madhu, and they are lying dead on the banks of the Madhu. Seeing this, Krishna has jumped into the Madhu. He is going to die. Krishna is going to die." Yashoda fell down in a swoon. She was revived by the others, and the state of Nanda was equally pitiable. The light of their lives was gone, and there was nothing left to live for. So they moaned and wept. By this time, the entire Vrindavana came to hear the dreadful news brought by the Gopala children, and there was lamentation in every house. No one thought of his son or his cow which was dead. They were all lamenting the fact that Krishna had jumped into the Madhu and was at the mercy of the dreadful snake Kaliya. Everyone rushed to the banks of Yamuna. They all thought that they should not have allowed the child to go without the protection of Balarama, who was his elder brother. In spite of the many miracles performed by him, Krishna was not known to them. They could not know that he was Narayana himself. To them he was a child who bore a charmed life, since so many of the dangers which threatened him had been averted by the grace of Narayana and because of the good fortune of his parents. Balarama had been left behind, and now look what had happened. Balarama had been listening to it all and smiled to himself. He knew who Krishna was and who he himself was. How he could not tell them the divine secret, Deva Rahasya, the birth of Krishna and the purpose of his birth and that of himself. Without speaking a word, he also went with them to the banks of the Yamuna, and there stood with them on the banks of the famed Kaliya Madhu. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudeva. Shri Krishnarpanamastu. Chapter 171 of Shrimadbhagawata, Kaliya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. In the meantime, Krishna, who had tightened the cloth round his waist, had dived into the Madhu with his two arms held together as if to beckon Kaliya to his death. So powerful was this dive that the waters began to come to life and there were waves created in the seemingly placid lake. With the diving of Krishna, the waters seemed to rise and to envelop him in their arms. The waves seemed to try and grasp him and suck him into their dark depths. Krishna began to swim around in the waters of the lake as though he were sporting there. For years, the lake had been undisturbed and the surface of the lake had ever been placid. Kaliya suddenly found that his calm was being disturbed. It seemed to him something was ruffling the surface of the lake. He did not pay much heed to it and stayed under as was his custom. After a while, he found that the waters were being churned and the upheaval on the surface was so great that he was being tossed about. Amazed at this phenomenon, which had never happened to him before, Kaliya moved his immense body and tried to rise to the surface of the lake. Till now, no one had dared to come near the lake, and today seemed to be different. Kaliya raised his 5 heads and looked at the world of men. He saw the banks of the lake. He saw hundreds of men and women weeping tears of sorrow. There was beating of breasts, and there were women who were trying to jump into the lake, and they were being held back by their men. There was one woman in particular who was weeping, and she seemed heartbroken. She was saying, "Krishna, my son, once you are dead, where is the point in any one of us living any more? Kaliya has killed you, and I will also be killed by him. I have no wish to live once I lose my son." Balarama and Nanda were holding her back, and Balarama said, "Look, mother, Krishna can never be killed, not so easily as all that. He had decided to punish the dreadful Kaliya, who has been polluting our Yamuna for years. He has killed our cows and our playmates, and it is but right that he should be punished, and that is the only reason why Krishna has jumped into the Madhu. Please, mother, possess your soul in patience, and he will come out triumphant. Just watch and see." Krishna had all this while been diving under the surface, and no one could see him. He now emerged out of the surface of the lake like the moon out of the eastern sky. Kaliya looked, and he saw a young boy rising out of waters. He was wearing a silken garment, yellow, like the sun, and it was all drenched with the waters of the Kaliya Madhu. He had a lovely mole on his chest, and his face had a divine smile playing on it. Of fear or worry, there was not even a trace, and he was so beautiful and his charm was so great that even Kaliya, the dread snake, was for a moment nonplussed at the sight of this heap of beauty. But he shook himself out of this slight moment of hesitation and began to lash at Krishna. He caught hold of Krishna and he wound his entire length round the form of the young body. With his 5 heads, he spat his virulent poison on the child. He dug his fangs deep into all the limbs of the little boy, and those who were watching from the banks could only look on with horror. And with a strange fascination, they stood spellbound, waiting for the moment when their beloved Krishna would fall down dead and become submerged in the blackened waters of the Madhu. Most of them were down on the ground, and they had fainted away, unable to see horror of their child being killed. Nanda himself was in a swoon, and Balarama was the only one who could keep Yashoda and Rohini from jumping into Kaliya Madhu. He spoke words of comfort to them. They could not believe him though, since they knew all about the fate of one who had been caught up in the coils of Kaliya. Nanda woke up from his swoon and tried to kill himself by falling all into the waters, and it was a hard task for Balarama to keep them all away from the waters. For a while, Krishna allowed this farce to go on, that he was caught up in the coils of the serpent, and that he was being crushed to death. Kaliya himself thought that the end of Krishna had come. Suddenly he felt that something was happening to him. A great weight seemed to be pressing on him on his entire length. It seemed to him as though someone was trying to tear him apart. He saw that Krishna was growing in size and that he was now straining at the bonds which tried to hold him. Kaliya tried his best to tighten his hold, but it was of no avail. Krishna slipped easily out of his coils, and the sight brought new life into the hearts of those who were watching. Despair now gave place to curiosity, and with wonderment they stood watching what was happening. A ray of hope began to illuminate their faces, since their little Krishna had managed to escape from Kaliya's hold. "Come, come quickly, Krishna," they shouted. "Come to the banks and we will pull you out. You can escape the clutches of this demon and you can be alive. Come before he gets hold of you again." So shouted all those on the banks. Krishna smiled at all of them and held out his palms as if to say, "Just stay and watch. You will see a lot of fun." Kaliya's anger knew no bounds. He opened his 5 hoods to the full, and hissing like the sea, he pounced on Krishna with a desire to sting him with all his fangs. He beat against the young form again, and every time Krishna eluded the strike of the snake. Here, there, everywhere was Krishna to be seen, and the dread Kaliya chased him with his hood upraised. His fangs were poised to strike, and just when Kaliya was sure he got Krishna, the young boy would escape, and the game went on for a while. For a moment, the 5 heads of the snake were still. The eyes were spitting fire, and the tongues were literally spitting poison. There was nothing but hatred in the red eyes of the snake, and it seemed as though he was ready to burn the child with his fury. The child who had dared to defy him and play with him. So, the pranks were not to his liking, and Kaliya wanted to punish Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishnarpanamastu. Chapter 172 of Shrimadbhagavatam. Kaliya subdued. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Suddenly, Krishna leaped into the sky and landed right on the head of the snake, on the heads of the snake. There was a great commotion everywhere. Krishna had evidently beaten Kaliya, since he was standing on the heads of the snake. Try as he would, Kaliya could not extricate himself from under the feet of Krishna. Krishna stood on one of the heads, and Kaliya tried to sting him with the fangs of the other 4. At once, Krishna's foot would be on the other head, and one after another he jumped on them. After a while, Krishna began to dance on the heads of Kaliya. The waters of the lake were lashing against the banks, and they made sweet music, and the waves kept time to the dancing of the Lord. His twinkling feet danced with abandon, and they were lit up by the gems on the heads of the snake. The tempo rose and rose, and there was no sign of Krishna ending his dance. The lashing of Kaliya's tail began to grow less and less, and he was getting tired. His exhaustion could be seen. He was still now spitting poison, but now he was spitting blood instead. Seeing the glorious dance of Krishna, the denizens of the heavens rejoiced, and the people of Vrindavana, standing on the banks, now beat time with their hands. They were no longer afraid for Krishna. Krishna danced, and every time a head of Kaliya tried to rise up, Krishna stamped on it and subdued it, and so it went on. Kaliya now realized who it was that had grazed his head by dancing on it. He saluted Narayana mentally. His wives were now sure that their Lord would die if Krishna did not show any mercy. They rose up to the surface of the lake and worshipped Krishna. They prayed to him to spare the life of their Lord. Krishna saw them and their children, and they were standing with their palms held together worshipping him. They said, "You are Lord of Lords, The punishment you have meted out to our Lord is but right and fair. We are not questioning it at all. The purpose of your avatara is to subdue the wicked, and you have done that now. You have punished us. According to us, it is not punishment but your divine grace granted to us. We know when Lord Narayana decides to punish a wrongdoer, his real intention is to grace the sinner and to rid him of all the sins he has committed. Because of sins committed in our previous births, we have been doomed to assume this dread form of snakes. But then, this Kaliya has also accumulated a lot of punya. In some previous birth or else, how could he have had the good fortune of having your lotus feet planted on his heads? The great Lakshmi herself performs puja and penances for a touch of the dust of your feet. When such is the case, without even asking for it, Kaliya has been granted the privilege, the good fortune of the touch of your sacred feet. Can anyone be more lucky? After touching your feet, no one desires heavenly bliss or the status of Brahma or the enviable position of being the Lord of the nether regions. That bliss has been granted to our husband. We salute you with all our hearts. We all see you and we have no desire. We have all seen you and we have no desire at all. But we have to ask you to spare Kaliya to us. You are the sea of affection and forgiveness, and we are thirsty for a drop from that ocean. Please forgive him this sin and grant him life. He was ignorant of your real nature and he behaved as he did because of that. Please grant us this boon. Let Kaliya live and make us happy. Kaliya was limp with fatigue. His heads were all hanging down and nothing was left of his arrogance. Krishna jumped off his heads. Kaliya breathed with great difficulty. Holding his palms together, he said, "My Lord, it is hard for one to abandon the dread disease called I. It is this ego which is the ruin of all living beings, and I was smitten by this dread disease. But you have cured me. My serpentine form is the embodiment of wickedness, and I acted according to my nature. I have now been roused from this sleep of ignorance. I know who you are, and I will never go back to my old nature." Krishna said, "Kaliya, you are forgiven, but you should not stay here anymore. Go back to the ocean and live with your kinsfolk. A river is meant for the use of human beings, and their lives depend on the river and her water. It is not right that you should poison it. Anyone who listens to this story of your conflict with me will never be afraid of snakes. Go back to where you came from." Seeing him standing silent, Krishna smiled and said, "I know what is worrying you. In the Ramanaka island, there is the dread of Garuda for you, and so you are worried. But let me assure you that Garuda will not harass you anymore. When I danced on your heads, my foot has marked each one of your hoods, and seeing that Garuda will leave you alone." Kaliya worshipped Krishna with flowers and gems and garlands of blue lotuses. He then prostrated before him with his wives and children and went away to the island by name Ramanaka. Yamuna became then free of the poison which polluted her. So Kaliya, bearing the imprint of the Lord's feet on his hoods, left the lake and crawled away. The water became sweet and pure, and the Gopas and Gopis rejoiced when they saw Krishna emerge from the lake, like the full moon after the eclipse. Yashoda, Rohini, Nanda and all the others wanted to rush to him and embrace him, but their happiness was so great that they stood spellbound as though they were unable to move. Balarama, however, strolled lazily towards his brother, and they embraced each other warmly. Only they understood the smile which lit up their faces. The elders and also the Nanda couple were again caught up in the Maya of the Lord, and they spoke to one another and said, "It is indeed providence which saved our little Krishna from the danger of Kaliya's poison. Gifts should be given lavishly to the Brahmins and to the poor, and Krishna should be protected from evil eyes." This, after seeing with their own eyes the divinity of Krishna when he danced on the heads of Kaliya. So great was the Maya which Krishna deliberately wove around the simple folk of Vrindavan. Yashoda took Krishna on her lap and shed tears of joy at the great good fortune of Vrindavan, since their darling was spared to them. They then thanked Narayana for it, and there was great celebration all round. The cows and the boys had got up as though from a long sleep. None of them went home that night, but spent it on the banks of the Yamuna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishnar Pranamast.